This has evolved, and currently we are in a much better frame of knowledge to ensure safety today much better than we did in March or April when we were groping around in the dark.
Welcome to the Blue Circle, and thank you all for joining in today. Such a big privilege and a pleasure to reconnect with everyone, our distinguished panelists who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience they bring in. And thank you to our audience for joining us. We've received over 200 registrations, and 90% of whom are CEOs and CXOs and business heads. Many of them are repeat visitors to our webinars. So this is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue on the online channels as well. For those of you who are new with us today, the Blue Circle is an exclusive network and ecosystem curated for business leaders to help them manage disruptive times and become future ready. We focus on four fundamental sectors, which are healthcare, energy, e-mobility, and real estate. We also present socioeconomic insights which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. In response to the COVID challenge, the Blue Circle has also accentuated its digital presence. One of the many modes we employ is our weekly webinar series, our digital publication. We're also building a handpicked domain-focused expert pool drawn from among our leadership community, from our member base and its associates that will guide businesses during and post-COVID across these four sectors. In addition to this, and you will be happy to know that we're very soon launching an exclusive digital platform for leaders, the LinkedIn for Leaders, wherein we will present to them the opportunity of connecting with people just like them. It will also house high quality curated content and meaningful conversations like we do on the online channels and offline channels as well. For those leaders who are interested, please do write to us. We've also begun our selective outreach for memberships. And the topic for today's session is healthcare providers bringing back the customers. Though all over the world, elective surgeries plummeted during COVID, in India, they were nearly banned. OPDs also grew empty. There were hardly any patients for routine blood work or mammograms, etc. Millions of people lost their jobs, thus crimping affordability too. How to bring these patients back is what the webinar would discuss comprehensively. We've invited practitioners and thought leaders from the sector and are privileged to have them here. In the best interest of time, I will just quickly mention their respective names and designations. We have with us Dr. Alok Malik, Group CEO, Omni Hospital, Mr. Harish Trivedi, President India Operations, Dr. Agarwal's Eye Hospital, Dr. Nandkumar Jairam, Chairman, CEO and GMD, Columbia Asia Hospital, Mr. Pankaj Sani, CEO, Medanta Hospital, Ms. Vrinda Mathur, Head Services South Asia, Senior Principal Management Consulting, PR RWI Equia. And the chair and moderator for the session is Mr. Pavan Chaudhary, best-selling author, CEO of French multinational Vigon, Chairman Medical Technology Association of India, and sits on several boards across the country. Welcome, sirs and ma'am. Kindly note that we will have Q&A towards the end of the session. Some of you have shared excellent questions and they're already with the chair and moderator. And now I request Mr. Chaudhary to please chair and moderate the session, sir.
Great. Thank you very much, Siddharth. And it's a pleasure to be here with you again. And let me jump directly into the topic after making one a little correction which we wanted to get made in the title. The title says healthcare providers bringing back the customers. I feel the title, and this is what our panelists also felt the two times that we interacted, that the word should be patients here, and that makes the words more aligned with the spirits we try to carry. However, that change was not possible, I believe, because the invitations had already gone out. So with that little correction, I asked Dr. Jairam that, Dr. Jairam, how the pandemic has hit various regions is not consistent. How it is hit various indications as far as elective surgeries are concerned is not the same. Even the size of hospitals and their recovery pattern, it is not consistent across the spectrum of spectrum of different sizes. So, what would you like to say about the specialty piece or the indication piece? That which of the indications, as far as elective surgeries are concerned, have been hit more, and which have been hit less, and why?
So, thank you. I would start off by saying that the pandemic, yes, hit all surgeries except for emergency cases in the first month or so of its existence in India. Of course, this was at different times in different parts of the country, but thereafter recovery occurred. The recovery was not consistent with all surgeries. There were surgeries that started coming back, and these were surgical procedures that were more urgent and important. So, for example, if you had a gallbladder stone that was causing symptoms, then people with such conditions resorted to surgery because there was little choice. What did not happen is the very elective kind of surgery, for example, bariatric surgery and cosmetic surgery, still not recovered to the extent, in fact, not recovered substantially at all as a consequence of the pandemic. I must also say that this recovery has been different in different places, and certain places have seen a greater number of cases being done and others less. And I would dare say it's directly proportional to the incidence of COVID patients at any point in time.
Very well put. So, to add to that, what would you like to say, Dr. Malik? How has the regional disparity been as far as recovery is concerned? And has the wallet of the patient been hit? And if yes, how is he reacting to this shrinking of his wallet?
Yeah, region disparities is very obvious. Like I belong to Pune, I work in Hyderabad, and I very clearly see the difference. Pune is struggling with COVID. There are 1,000 patients on bed, critical patients on bed, continuously for the last couple of months. Initially, it was patients from the city. Now it's patients from the peripheries, other districts, which are now peaking. Pune metropolitan region has peaked, but the other feeding areas are now peaking. So the number of patients ultimately stay the same. The hospital is running out of oxygen. There are no acute care beds. So there are no beds to treat other patients, even if they want to. Whereas in Hyderabad, after the initial rush, it started settling down, and surgery started coming back. One interesting point is single specialty hospitals like eye hospitals, ENT hospitals, they continue to work because the patient is intelligent. He doesn't want to go and mingle with COVID patients. So I've seen single specialty eye hospitals doing routine work. I'm sure Mr. Harish will bear with me. Of course, the work dipped. People were scared, but it didn't dip as much as a typical multi-specialty hospital. And obstetric work continues. I mean, kids won't wait for COVID to go away. That continued. In fact, in most of our multi-specialty hospitals, when the nursing homes got scared and closed down and shut down in the initial part of COVID, all their obstetric work went to us. So in some of our units, they showed 200 to 300% growth in obstetric work, season on season. But yes, acute care, emergency surgeries, they continued. Lots of planned surgeries are waiting. And we are all, as we all know, healthcare cannot be cancelled. It can be delayed. It cannot be cancelled. So every hospital is now gearing up. They don't want to lose their infra, their manpower infra. Quarter 3 and quarter 4 post-COVID will be heavy because all this pent-up work will now start coming back to us. That's a fact for sure.
Great point. So, Pankaj, let me pull you in here. And let us debate around this point a bit regarding, let us say, the obstetric work. it is true that that could not wait. However, one study came in from Ireland which said that the number of premature births has gone down because mothers, expectant mothers, are caring for themselves a little better, or are not so stressed because of their work schedules, etc. Another point which I heard anecdotally from a child and women care hospital promoter, that the number of cesarean sections which were unnecessary went down. That means those few days which used to where the baby used to arrive before was necessary, and that reduced the premature births, and that reduced the load on the hospital and or the offtake of medical technology products. What is your view on that? And Dr. Alok Malik, I'll give you a chance to respond on this this question. I'm sure you'll illuminate the stage further for us. Pankaj.
Yeah, so thank you. I think the first important point to note with respect to COVID, and frankly speaking, even before COVID, is that you should very seriously question a lot of the data that is coming up. We have a horrible track record of having accurate data on health in India. And one of the things that comes out with COVID is that, you know, everybody becomes an expert, and we have actually a lot of challenges in the industry with everybody being a fake expert and all this WhatsApp university kind of information. So I'm not very sure whether the kind of the numbers or the reports which you're quoting are actually statistically relevant or even correct for that matter. Yes, there are definitely areas where we have cesarean section rates vis-a-vis the number of births which are much higher than they should be, and there could be some indication around the fact that that is because of the fact that people are choosing more elective cesareans than may be necessary. Whether that is because of the patient's need or because of the doctor's need, that is up for debate, because we do have a culture where patients even prefer, I would like my child to be born on this date, so please ensure that my delivery happens on this date. Now, we know in nature it doesn't work like that, but unfortunately these are the times and the world in which we live in. So I think that one, caution on the data that we have, and two, I think that if you look at the concept which you highlighted, that people are staying home or looking after themselves better, I don't actually subscribe to this point of view. In fact, our experience is the exact reverse. What we have found is that for many procedures or many diseases and treatments, including cardiac issues, including gastroenterology issues, GI, liver issues, patients actually have been delaying arriving to the hospital to their detriment. And what ends up happening is that they end up coming then in more of an emergency scenario. And dealing with a patient, especially if you have to undergo any kind of an intervention in an emergency scenario, is always more risky than undergoing that same intervention in a slightly more elective scenario. So our experience has actually been that patients have, to their detriment, delayed accessing medical care because of the fear of COVID. Now, that was one reason. The other reason earlier on was really, frankly, with a lockdown, you were not able to travel. There was restrictions on border movement. Even today, public transportation, which many people depend on, whether it is interstate buses, interstate trains, even aviation, these things are all still running at a, you know, kind of very small marginal percentage to what they were before COVID. So there is a very real challenge with people being able to access healthcare. So my hypothesis to all of this is that in general, it has been detrimental. I think that even the fact that people are staying home locked up means less physical exercise, more stress, anxiety, lots of mental health issues. We know for a fact that all of these things affect many organs and many parts of the body. So I think that the entire COVID situation has not at all helped with improving the healthcare scenario. It has actually made things much worse.
Yeah. Sure, good points. In fact, just to complement what you have said, that it is very important that we bring out the dangers of delayed healthcare. However, at the same time, the dangers of delayed healthcare are indication dependent. So a cancer can move from stage 1 to stage 4 very fast, and a cardiological situation can develop into a myocardial infarction very fast. However, for maybe natural reproductive processes, etc., though the data is still to come, you're right. I feel that there will be that there is a little less chance of things getting into a serious mode in these reproductive indications, which happen, which is a normal natural process, and perhaps we will wait to see as to how the landscape changes. But otherwise, you've made a good point that.
Pawan, if I were to just add to Pankaj's point as well, right? We had actually, as IQVIA, we've done a survey of several thousand patients. And Pankaj, my apologies, but it's an expert report or output that you're going to hear. But we spoke to several thousand patients sometime in April and May. Out of those thousands, about 10% clearly indicated that they had actually delayed their surgeries. In some cases, in the initial phase of the lockdown, there were some doctors and hospitals as well who had also advised a delay in surgery because of access issues, availability of manpower, etc., which was fair. We interviewed the very same 10% individuals again after a period of 3 months, somewhere around August, July, end in August. And we inquired whether they actually went back to get their surgeries done. More than 60% of them said that they still had a fear of going back into the hospitals and therefore did not, are again intending to delay their surgeries and wait it out a little bit longer until it is safe to walk into a hospital, until a hospital is COVID-free. I don't think any of us can answer that question right now as to when a hospital would be COVID-free. The remaining 40% actually, and just to corroborate what Pankaj was saying, actually is that they had experienced deterioration of their condition. And almost 50% of those had to go for emergency procedure or had to adopt for alternative medication to take care of that deterioration of the situation. So I think that, that fear factor is probably still evident. And it has resulted in, procrastination of surgeries, which, especially maybe not the, gynecology-oriented ones where there isn't a choice, but at least on all others and elective surgeries, that is something that is very, validated even at a data perspective that we've seen. So, just wanted to add that point.
I think you've very well balanced our points, which actually were complementary to each other. Both Pankaj and I were agreeing to the importance of anecdotal studies which require greater illumination. And I think you added a very good perspective saying that some patients increase their dosages to stay free from surgery or kind of delay their surgery. Great point. And IQVIA has done a lot of research on this. I'm very impressed with their work. Coming to Harish. Harish, what is your take on the point which I asked Dr. Alok Malik, that have the wallets of the customers or patients shrunk because there has been so much unemployment? Has the median customer or patient started shopping for surgeries? Is that something what you're seeing? That is there a very strong price sensitivity which has suddenly come up?
Thanks, Pawan. Yes, definitely. Because of the job losses and the salary cut, we are seeing across wallet of our patients has got shrunk. Definitely, they are going in and shopping, window shopping for the surgery rates across the. At least I'll talk about first single specialty. The other option which they are currently opting is the surgery, and industry in which we are, where normally we do a cataract surgery, which is a major part of our surgery, which we do more than 80%. So we have seen people were going for a multifocal higher end of the lenses, now opting for a lower end and getting the surgery done. Still the surgeries is getting done, So where average surgery cost was around say 25 to 30,000, they are all going and opting for a 25 to 20, 15 to 20,000. So yes, we can see the impact. Apart from this, you also see the impact where the options of getting surgery finance, which was the another option which was available because of this moratorium clause. Most of the financial institution are not ready to finance the patients. So we are also seeing that whatever the 2 or 3% which was getting financed is again stopped. So yes, overall we are seeing a major impact.
Basically, what you're saying is that though insurance companies have made a windfall gain this year because elective surgeries have shrunk so much, they have not become generous in other spheres. They have kept their fist tightly closed in other spheres, though they have made a windfall gain. Is that what you're saying, Harish?
No, I'll not say that because see, entire financial year is still pending. So people will definitely get the surgery done. It is just the postpone of the surgeries, elective surgery is happening at this point of time. First, I'll talk about the single specialty, then come to multi-speciality. So if you see the from the pandemic time started, April and May, we haven't seen any surgery. We were not doing any surgery. Slowly, with the unlocking in the month of June, we have seen some surgeries coming back. So we are a purely elective surgery, and our target audience is more than 50. And if they are comorbid, normally they would not like to visit the hospital, purely a fear psychosis. Now, lately, we have seen in the last 2 months, patients are coming back and then we are doing the surgeries. As far as the insurance is concerned, there is a postponement of elective surgeries that will definitely going to happen maybe 2 or 3 months later. So you will not be able to say they'll be able to make the any gains because in this financial year they can still in the 1 year entire period they can still get the surgeries done. So I don't think there's any windfall gains for an insurance company.
So you very well alluded to the definition of elective surgery, that it is a surgery which has to happen in a finite period of time, and it is not an optional surgery. Very well made point, Harish. Coming back to Dr. Malik. Dr. Malik, regarding the size of the hospitals, do you feel that the recovery has been similar across sizes, or your view is different?
Yeah, it's basically two variables important. One is size, and one is a hospital cost optimized or not. I know many small hospitals which are not optimized. I know many big hospitals which are very, very optimized. So recovery, I've seen personally because I've been talking to my friends in Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Pune. I can talk about these three markets.
Can you please speak up a bit, Dr. Alok?
I've been speaking to my friends in Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Pune. So what comes out is hospitals which are optimized for cost, and say in that 100 to 200 bed size, so that they have lower fixed costs, they recover faster. That is definitely there. They recovered faster. They recovered their patient faster. They recovered their fiscal stability faster. And they kind of everybody was kind of 30, 40, 50% EBITDA negative in March and April. By May and June, we were kind of flat. We have broken even.
Yeah. Our view is also similar that larger hospitals have taken longer to recover. 100 to 200 beds hospitals have taken shorter times to recover. Of course, this is not, this is not statistically proven. This is our preliminary view. And many unorganized sector hospitals have gone under. Coming back to Dr. Nandakumar Jairam. Dr. Jairam, what do you think are the ways to bring back the patients? What is the best way to bring back the patients? And then we'll come to some strategies, because some questions have come that they would like to learn from all these leading providers as to how to bring back the patient. Dr. Jairam.
Yeah, all of us understand that the most important thing is to instill a sense of confidence in the patient that their surgery is not fraught with any additional risk. Until that confidence comes back, they will not walk in for their surgery. This confidence can come from two sources. One, from the patient understanding for themselves that it is safe to go for their surgery. And number two, that the doctor is confident enough to tell them that, your surgery will go off well. I think these are very, very important. I don't believe that a billboard or any other form of advertising can create this sense of confidence. It has to come from the fact that they have witnessed and understood that it is safe for them. And I believe that the reason that there are improving numbers as we see month on month, which is also something that we have witnessed, is because this sense of confidence, albeit slowly, is developing in them.
Great point. Would you like to add something to this, Pankaj? Do you fully agree with what Dr. Jairam has said, that patient realization that he's safe and doctor assurance that he will be safe are the only two legs on which the overture to bring the patient back can successfully stand? Pankaj.
So I agree with Dr. Jairam that these are two very important levers for patients to come back to the hospital. And of course, patients have to feel secure. But I do not think that they are the only two ones. I think especially for the bigger institutions where, especially like ours, where you are doing tertiary, quaternary type of care, we tend to be what they call a destination hospital, in the sense patients come from all over the country and all over the world. So one big issue, of course, for the country in terms of patients and for all hospitals is that international patient, which is a significant source of income, export income for the country, as well as for the hospitals. This is essentially zero, because there is no real travel for international patients, and many institutions that contribute somewhere between 10 to 20% of the revenues. So that's one big issue. The second issue is that even within the country, people are finding it challenging to travel. And for us, at least, we get a large number of patients from outside the state or the city where we are having our hospitals. And so I think that has been actually possibly even a bigger concern with patients than just the activity of the question of the safety in the hospital. And don't forget that this is very, very different whether you're talking about something like a joint replacement or aesthetic surgery or a bariatric surgery that Dr. Jairam alluded to earlier, which you could say is more elective in nature. If you delay that procedure by a couple of months, maybe nothing adverse will happen to your health. Versus, say, a cardiac surgery or a cancer procedure or any kind of treatment where it is significantly more detrimental to delay. So I think that you actually have to separate this on these 2 or 3 lines. We can't actually look at all the patients in the same way.
Excellent point you have added. The point which you have added is that it is not only my own hospital which is required to attract the patient enough. Even the travel which he undertakes, let us say from Bilaspur to Delhi, that piece also should be safe. He should feel secure about that also. Great point. So you're taking the discussion to outside the hospital also. Great. I'll come back to Dr. Alok. Dr. Malik, what would you like to add to what Dr. Jairam and Pankaj have said so far?
Yeah, Pankaj brought out a great point, and I know of a hospital chain in the East. In all their branches, all tertiary care hospitals, they have actually hired, say, at least 3, if not 6 buses to ferry passengers from the peripheries to their OPDs. And they said, we have a network of physicians there who routinely send patients to your hospitals. And the patients are there, but there is no safe means of transport. So these buses, you have your nurses, you have everybody wearing masks, and it's all sanitized. They carry the buses to their OPDs, and they said there were 30% conversion rates to IP. Because these are the patients who actually were waiting, and they were basically cut off from the hospital because of, as Pankaj very rightly said, absence of reliable and safe transport. And I thought, oh wow, that's a great idea. The bus pays for itself. So we started doing the same. It's a wonderful idea.
Also, do you not feel that, of course, Dr. Jairam has spoken in a generic manner, but some level of advertising can also help. Let us say, look at it in a two-pronged manner. The risk of staying at home when you actually need a surgery. If this is communicated, it can stir the patient to move before things become so bad that that they will not be able to handle it. Second thing is, what about the patient's uh, safety in the hospital? The very visuals of some seats taped, intermittent seats taped, and other such visuals which are talking about social distancing in a very clear-cut visual manner, credible visual manner, they are also confidence inspiring. So there is a couplet in Hindi which says, खुशबुओं को फैलने का शौक है मगर मुमकिन नहीं हवाओं से रिश्ता किए बगैर. So that means the fragrances have this desire to spread, but they cannot spread without engaging in a partnership with the winds which will carry them. So do you not feel that some level of advertising is also required? Of course, it has to be calibrated, it has to be credible, and it has to be responsible. Harish, what do you say about that?
Yeah, so I agree with the point raised by Dr. Jairam. The main reason why patients are not visiting hospital is the fear psychosis. They are worrying about the safety. If we, in a calibrated manner, with the digital campaign which we run and which really helped us, where we are demonstrating through a video what are the safety precautions we have taken and how we are providing the 5-star safety to our patients, and that is really helping us. So that's a positive way of communicating to our patients about the safety precautions. And only once they come and see, seeing is believing. So when they enter the hospital, they see the triage and all the social distancing and their mask and sanitization. And definitely a discussion with the doctor where he gives a lot of confidence to a patient, because if the doctor is not confident, patient will not come and do the surgery. So I completely agree. It is very important safety of a patient, which is they can see it and believe it, and definitely his discussion with the doctors and the confidence we provide the doctor makes a lot of difference, and we are seeing a lot of positive impact, and surgeries are coming back.
I think you have all beautifully complemented the beautiful point which Dr. Nand Kumar put as a capsule. You have all brought different ramifications to that point. That's really great. Coming to Vrinda, what about the digital piece? Is the digital piece a very big attraction now? Has it become an important platform of engagement? Many of the patients will come through this platform. What has been your experience, and what does the research say in this regard?
I think some of the larger hospitals which had made a lot of investments in digital technology, which was actually, I mean, probably not getting used as much, saw increased usage during this phase. Most of the larger, whether it was simply a model where it's a teleconsultation, etc., or it is in that context. There is also increased for hospitals which are probably not invested in that technology. There is a lot of conversation going and identification of assets and solutions which exist in the market. The quickest and the easiest ones where they could transition. So there is of course a lot of discussion around that as well. Patients actually have also indicated increased digital interactions. I mean, of this lot that we spoke to, about 30% of them said that they had done some form of digital interactions with hospitals. They were also using online pharmacies a lot more. Doctors are using digital platforms for attending the CMEs as well as getting advice. Medical representatives are, hardly being permitted in doctors' chambers, so there is the interaction there is also digital. So patient, doctor, doctor rep, pharma patient, pharma doctor, hospital patient, all of these interactions are moving, are taking a digital direction, and assets and technology which have been developed in the country or by hospitals themselves in-house have actually been put to use. So there is increased talk of digital, there is increased adoption of digital as well. Perhaps the level of investment that is being made in digital may not be so high, because it will take hospitals some time to recover from the setback of 2020 as well. And therefore, increased digital spending, we are probably likely to see only once hospitals have completely recovered, or perhaps in 2021. But adoption rates have increased significantly already. Those results are evident, whether in terms of platforms that are there, or asking patients if they're actually using it. A new set of doctors as well who are potentially not participating or were engaged with larger hospitals, etc. They are coming onto digital platforms, and patients are open for new doctor interactions as well if they can't access their regular doctors in the hospitals as well.
So you're absolutely right. There are, in the last 1 quarter, there have been 5 crore digital consultations, 5 crore patients, and they have come twice, 8-minute long sessions on an average. That means 10 crore digital consultations. So what is this sudden juggernaut which is developing? And why is it developing? What does it bring for the customer, the patient, the doctor, the payer, and the government? And let me begin with Dr. Jairam again. Dr. Jairam, what are the main points why this digital transformation is getting driven so fast? And I would bring you all in an additive fashion.
Right. So I would say that the main reason is the safety and ease under these circumstances of the pandemic for you to seek medical attention. That has helped. And there are other, significant advantages as well. For the doctor, there is his or her own safety, because the interaction on digital can certainly not transmit the virus. And that is one good way of ensuring safety to oneself. So this is one of the 3 reasons that I would say that has pushed digital forward. There are, however, the following points that I would like to place on the table. While digital has taken off, it has not taken off uniformly. I don't believe that the advantages that digital can offer has been maximized in our country, which is very, very advanced and capable of advancing even more rapidly in this fashion. Number 2, the restriction is that it can only go to a certain point at this point in time, and digital can exist up to diagnosis and treatment of conditions, accessing investigations, as well as medication. Obviously, it cannot be used for anything that is procedure oriented, and in certain instances where clinical examination is mandatory. Advances will need to occur in this direction. Perhaps it is also relevant for me to point out, and Vrinda made a point about this, but I will allude to it just to raise emphasis, that clinicians who are reluctant to adopt digital technology have, as a consequence of this pandemic, accepted it. And this indeed is one step forward to ensure that this method, so vital to medical science now and in the future, has moved forward several steps.
Excellent point. You also alluded to the fact that perhaps the medical profession is a little conservative, and here reform only moves at glacial speed, and it is the renovator's delight. But COVID has really pushed the boundaries and pushed the speed of the reform. Great point you have made regarding safety, ease, and economics. What else does the digital, what else brings the digital mode such momentum, Dr. Malik?
Yeah, it's the next step. I mean, actually, we are waiting for the next step. I mean, I've been 5 years full time in healthcare. I was waiting for this, not waiting for COVID and the pandemic, but waiting for digital adoption. Doctors used to be finicky about it. Patients were not ready. They wanted a touch and feel of the doctor and to see the doctor face to face. They wouldn't mind waiting 3 hours in the OPD queue. And the government rules were at best edgy. Now, post-pandemic, you have a government which is readily agrees, kind of signed on the dotted line, okay, digital is legally correct. Now you can go ahead, whatever you want to do. The patients are scared. They're willing to come on digital. The young doctors are always willing to come on digital. And they happily took to it like duck to water. The senior doctors, they suddenly realized, hey, all the patients are going to this guy. And the patients started connecting with the younger doctors. And then when the seniors started changing their track and they started connecting with patients through digital. This is happening across all hospitals, big and large, big and small. And now will come the next step. Most of the quote unquote telemedicine solution providers are building their applications at a frenetic pace as we speak to first create an OPD EMR and then get into an IPD EMR. So we have a full stack ultimately coming up. So this pandemic, thankfully, is pushing us to digital medicine with the government model.
Pankaj, what would you like to add to that? What else is fueling the digital metamorphosis?
So I think that the digital journey actually had started even before the pandemic. And if you look at our evolution in India, it has not been that long since you thought that you would not be ordering your taxi on a mobile phone or your food on a mobile phone. So this journey had started many years before, or many months before at least, COVID. I think the speakers before me had mentioned, the biggest issue in this was really the adoption from the provider side. So whether it was the doctor or the caregiver was a little bit more hesitant, and there are a variety of reasons. Sometimes it was lack of guidelines from the government and some concerns about medical legal. Sometimes it was that I already have such a very busy OPD, so I don't need this. Sometimes it was a fear that I can't deliver the right kind of care if I don't actually have the patient in my room. Now, it's very interesting that if you actually go to a doctor's clinic and you actually study how many patients that a doctor sees during the course of the day and how many times a patient actually physically examines the patient versus is actually providing the care without physically touching the patient, it would give you an indication of what is the potential of telemedicine without even the technological advances. So I think that this journey had started from the patient side much before it had started from the clinician side. COVID has forced the clinicians and the providers to essentially get with the times. And like was mentioned before, some people who were resistant were forced into it because there were no patients coming in the physical OPD. And so the only way you had to kind of see patients was to get digital. And then also clinicians were afraid of getting COVID. So digital, of course, will be a way to treat patients without actually getting concerned around getting COVID from the patient. So these things have, of course, happened. The other thing that I think was also underway, but will get expedited is, look, digital health and the advancements and usage of technology is much more than just a teleconsultation, right? And even the way in which we describe digital, we tend to equate it to teleconsultation. You have to think of technology innovations in terms of artificial intelligence, wearables, as well as what I believe will happen as we move forward is you will have the breakdown of the delivery of healthcare. So if you think of today, most of the healthcare, especially if it is pertaining to an intervention, ends up happening in one setting where a patient will come, get admitted, get their preliminary checkups, get their surgery, get discharged, and then move on and even come back to the hospital for a post follow-up. You may actually see with increasing technological innovation and increasing mindset shift of both patients as well as care providers, that this will get disaggregated. So you may have that the pre-operative checkups, these things will happen at home. Somebody will go home, collect your sample, take your test, you do much of your checkup remotely, come in the day of surgery, get a final checkup done before you get operated. And maybe even very soon after your operation, you will be able to go home because now there are people who will assist providing a large part of the care at home. You'll have a physiotherapist come at home, your doctor will follow up with a teleconsult, maybe you will have some kind of wearable device that will be able to provide certain feedback to the doctor. Also, give an alert in real time, and then you can be called back in. Also, maybe you don't have to come back to the hospital where you got operated. Maybe there will be more ambulatory care clinics. These kind of things have been existing and have been increasing in the West for many years, largely driven by the high cost of healthcare in hospitals and insurance pushing them. But ambulatory care is a very well established phenomenon in the West. So you will find a lot more of this happening. Some institutions in the West are doing things like hip replacements, joint replacements with 0-day stay. So this is already there. Now we need to kind of figure out a mechanism that allows for us to adopt this, a mechanism where we can say, look, Indian patients cannot afford thousands and thousands of rupees worth of wearable devices. So we have to come up with solutions which work for India. And I think more than just digital, what we need, and there are active efforts on in this, is we need actually to mash together the tech people who tend to be kind of more startup oriented, bit newer organizations with the traditional organizations which have been developing care. Right now, both seem to be operating in silos. And we actually need to bring these people together, because technology on its own will not deliver healthcare. Remember, you need a care provider, you need a doctor, you need a patient. Without these two things, healthcare doesn't happen. So you need to bring in the tech providers, bring in the innovation, along with the doctors, nurses, etc., and the patients, and meld all of this together so that we can truly deliver healthcare. Real healthcare will be a combination of digital and offline together.
Very good points. In fact, what you have said is that digital healthcare telemedicine was a natural evolution of healthcare in the digital world. And it was the patient who was the spearhead. And some research has come out which clearly says that the patient also sees telemedicine as an immunity, as an immunization, or as a protection against the poor behavior of some doctors or some nursing staff, etc., hospital staff, etc. So he is actually shopping for health and dignity. In fact, there is another research which has come out, which is also, of course, preliminary, but it is showing very clearly that the lower economic strata customers, people are adapting to e-shopping in droves, much more than the proportionate increase in the higher economic strata people. And the reason they are surmising is that the lower economic strata customers are not getting the dignity in the shopping malls, dignified behavior in the shopping malls from the shopkeepers or fellow shoppers, etc. So they can buy in greater dignity. And the other day, Dr. Malik was mentioning the bringing in of compassion and a reference to the famous book. Now the patient will see you now. So I feel that is surely one thing which is driving this overall behavior, which is called, this tribe of people is called Hikikomori. Hikikomori is those people who have separated themselves from the world and engage now only with the world through technology, because interpersonal interaction creates stress and distress. So they engage only through technology, because technology doesn't judge, technology doesn't insult and things like that. So that is one very interesting point which you brought in, and I wanted to amplify that. Coming to Harish. Harish, what would you like to add to the discussion so far on the digital piece, why it is moving so fast?
So Pawan, it is absolutely correct. It is just by force of the pandemic. With the mobile penetration and accessibility of the connectivity right now, and what we are broadly discussing about the delivery model, which is a curative model, right? We want all the patients to bring to a hospital, treat them and send them back. But most of so it is purely from the perspective of the metro city or a class A, or when you go to tier 3 and tier 4 city or the villages, where the accessibility and affordability is still the issue. And then getting all those patients even under insurance, which is provided by government, is practically not possible. We just require one pandemic to expose the vulnerability which we have. Providing beds, we already know it is an issue. And when we talk about, on one side of PM talks about the demographic dividend, and then what we are currently talking is only a 1 year, 2 year solution. And I think we are going to face the major problem, and I don't think we are ready for it. The future, say maybe 5 years down the line, all will be in 40s. After 10 years, they all will be in 45, and they all will be facing problems. So how to face this? So I see telemedicine as a starting point, which provides the easy accessibility, I'll say affordability in a way, to all the people across in equitable manner. And this is just a starting point. I see a lot of opportunity, which Pankaj has discussed about the wearable devices. Right now, yes, it's a problem. Cost could be a debatable issue. But let's talk about the IoT devices, Bluetooth enabled IoT devices. Just look at how many providers we have in country at this point of time. So best of the, even if we have to go to China or for Israel as is the place, the kind of innovations or ecosystem they have for a startup. It is tremendous. Even the work which is happening in this only one city, Tel Aviv, is good enough to reform the entire healthcare system. So we need to move away from the curative approach to a preventive approach, and that's very well discussed by Pankaj, where I'll say end-to-end delivery system, which is home to hospital to home. It can be taken care. So definitely with the help of IoT devices, you can track the patients vital on real-time basis. Alert goes to patients and a doctor wherever the intervention is required. You get the patients only for a surgery or a curative process to a hospital and immediately discharge the patients, because we require more beds going forward, and keeping larger the loss, more chances of getting the hospital acquired infection. That will be the concern area for all the patients. So move them home immediately and then provide the home healthcare services. Still, you can track the patients. Even going forward and then set up a EICU, remote monitoring facility, for the tier 3 and tier 4, because getting the doctors in these areas is a problem. So why not provide this facility in tier 3 or 4, and it can be a hub and spoke model going forward. So that's a one piece. Definitely AI will definitely play an important role, and we know the adaptation to digital platforms was an issue, and that's the reason most of the hospitals are struggling with the EMR or EHR, and we don't have a data for the AI. So obviously going forward, a lot of work which is happening on the AI, which will come into a play, looking at the lot of medical legal cases which is happening. So doctor would definitely like to, before signing off the report, he would like to run through AI. Machine learning will definitely play a role. And for the patient data and the patient data control, we will definitely look at the blockchain, a lot of work which is happening on that aspect, where it will provide the complete ownership to a patient, what kind of data he wants to share with whom. So currently that's the issue. So broadly, looking at the longer term perspective, we need to move from a curative to a preventive approach with end-to-end solution, which is home to hospital to home.
Yeah, great points, great points. So if I was to summarize, for the patients, other than safety, ease, economics, telemedicine also brings the possibility of discussing stigmatized indications like sexological problems or psychological problems. It also improves accuracy in some cases, because let us say a patient suffers from white coat hypertension whenever he approaches the hospital and gets his blood pressure checked. But if he's made to check the same blood pressure at home in a proper manner, then these errors also can be reduced. For doctors, other than the points which you said, excellent points you all made, I think there is waiting room pressure also, which gets reduced. And the cognitive load will become reduced once we have the provided, once we have healthcare records, list of allergies coming to him at the click of a button. Maybe increased revenues and patient loads also. From the payer's point of view, there are less costs, as well as arm's length prescribing. E-prescribing systems should be standardized. This will also improve accuracy, make it more make the prescription more arm's length, etc. And from the government's point of view, the shortage of doctors and nurses and overloading of some doctors and or some doctors staying more free, that can also be handled. So if it helps so many people, then then the genie is out of the bottle. You cannot put it back. I am reminded of the only instance like this I can see where everybody is winning was when Henry Ford brought his assembly car assembling system. So the worker benefited because the work hours came down, wages went up, the customer benefited because the prices came down, the manufacturer benefited because the profits went up. So all of them benefited. Then you cannot turn such an omelette back into the egg. And actually, this Henry Ford's success in every area hit the communist logic and the communist ideology more than any capitalist ideology could. So I think telemedicine's time has come, and it can be really utilized, as you all made it very clear, that it should be seen as a continuum and seen what part of the healthcare will it take to home, what part of the healthcare will stay in the hospital, and what part of the healthcare may come to smaller units of healthcare which are distributed through the urban tissue. Great points. I would like to continue this discussion, but I'm under pressure to ask some questions. And many of the questions you have already answered, but there are some which require a little deeper dive. So, safety of doctors and staff has not been considered in this discussion so far. Dr. Nandakumar Jairam, we request your input on this, your comprehensive input on this, and then I'll come to Dr. Malik. And in the end, we will make the lady close the discussion.
Sure.
Dr.
You're absolutely right. The question is quite valid. But I would say that we did allude to the safety of both patient and doctor on and off. But let me elaborate to say that the safety of the doctor and really healthcare professionals is one major consideration that all healthcare providers do take care of and should take care of at this point in time. Now, it's not just wearing of protective equipment that I speak about. I speak about training. I speak about their environment. I speak about the hospital environment, which can be more safe or less safe for healthcare professionals. I speak about testing, tracing where required. I speak about isolation. All these are extremely important when it comes to healthcare professionals. On the side of the patients, I would say that we went through an evolution after the commencement of this epidemic to understand and appreciate many facts. I would allude to one of the most important, and that is asymptomatic positives. I would say that the presence of asymptomatic positives taught the healthcare professional that it is best to consider that any patient seeking medical attention or undergoing a procedure should be assumed to be positive unless otherwise proven. And precautions for the patient and the surgeon, or for that matter, every person participating in healthcare of that patient, should be such that they assume they are treating a COVID positive patient. This is not overdue. There have been instances where this has been considered overdue, but this is not overdue. And it is, I believe, the best way of ensuring that there is safety and reduction of transmission. There has also been a better understanding of the methodology of transmission and the safety that exists in other forms. For example, everybody knew about hand washing and masking, but the distance one has to maintain, the value of shields, and so on and so forth. While it's difficult for me to allude into every single bit, I would summarize as follows. A, it is vital that we protect our healthcare professionals because they are a commodity that cannot be compromised because we don't have enough of them. And of course, they are human beings and require every care to themselves. We need to safeguard our patients because we owe it to them. And risking a patient to COVID when he or she is treated for some other condition is certainly hazardous and not required at all. And lastly, that this has evolved, and currently we are in a much better frame of knowledge to ensure safety today much better than we did in March or April when we were groping around in the dark.
Excellent points, Dr. Jairam. Dr. Malik, you'd like to add something to that?
Yeah, Dr. Jairam mentioned March and April. Those are March, especially end of March, beginning of April, dark days. Everybody is scared. The data coming out of Spain, data coming out of some other Western European countries, doctors dying, patients dying, and these are early days of COVID. I think the first patient came in Pune, and when the cases started trickling in every city, many of our nurses ran away. Many of our doctors said, yeah, I'm no longer coming to the hospital. And that is the time, at least in our, with us, we got us shut down. Everybody got their heads down, their thinking caps on. Government, luckily, has published some very lovely documents, guidances. So we went through those guidances, we expanded on them and created our own internal guidance document. I remember at that time, PPE was not available. We were, the PPEs were all getting imported. They were all landing in this big air hub in Nagpur. We sent nearly half a dozen ambulances, drove them down to Nagpur and picked them up from the airport. At that time, what a PPE kit, which is $200 today, time $1,500, $2,000, right? And we paid that price. For a 100-bed hospital, we bought stuff worth 15 lakh rupees to assure the doctors, look, we are putting the best we can. We are making, and we started, as Dr. Jairam said, intensive training program. The more you train, the less you're afraid. The more you train, the less you're afraid, right? And every patient, of course, going for procedure or going for surgery was treated as COVID positive. Beds were vacant. We had lots of beds. We started actually quarantining patients. Patients coming for surgery, we tell them, okay, you may be COVID positive. And if you undergo the stress of surgery, that might actually, we have screened you, you look to be negative, but may actually be maybe in the window period. So let me quarantine you for 5 days free of charge. You just pay me the bed charge. 5 days stay in bed. If he's free at the 5th day, we take him up for surgery or procedure. We did all of those things. And ultimately, over a period of 2-3 weeks, the doctors became more confident. The fence sitters who are now at home, they started coming back to the hospital. The patients started coming back. That confidence had to be built. Absolutely.
Great point. Great point. Coming with my next set of questions to Pankaj and Harish. Handle 50% of these or less as you want. And then I'll go finally to Vrinda to ask her the couple of most startling research findings she has found, which are refreshing and original, or we have not heard about, or most of us have not heard about those things. So first, let me come to Pankaj. Pankaj and Harish. Do you think that using technologies like robotics for disinfection can be used to increase patient confidence? Especially because patients would like visible proof that the hospital is safe to come and get a treatment. And my second question and third questions are kind of similar. For certain procedures, for example, ophthalmology, would any of you consider moving towards ambulatory care delivery if patients are not comfortable coming to hospital? And the third question is, since healthcare is increasingly decentralized, community or home-centered, is this also an opportunity for hospitals to extend their services into the community rather than having patients visit a centralized hospital? Pankaj.
So let me answer your third question first. Yes, it is definitely an opportunity for hospitals or any kind of care provider to extend their services better into the community. In fact, that is arguably how many of these services should have been delivered irrespective of COVID. The challenge, of course, has been that on the private side, primary care has been challenging both economically as well as in terms of operationally. And so it has been an underinvested area, as a result of which even patients who can get treated in the community or in the neighborhood end up coming to the bigger hospitals for care because there is no alternative option. So that's one challenge. So definitely COVID can accelerate that. In terms of the opportunities around robotics and sanitization, look, robotics is actually something which can help us a lot if delivered properly. Now, we have at least demonstrated and tried out 4 to 5 different robots. The fact of the matter is that they look good on videos, but they don't work in real life. So there are many, many nuances which need to go to how you actually navigate the robot, the fact that the robot can only do certain things. They say it can carry items, but the base is so unstable that the items fall over if it knocks into even something small. So, you know, I would say that on robotics, my personal experiences is that the hype has been more, the delivery has been less. And we are very keen to explore if it really works, how it can work, and where it can be deployed. You know, just having robotics for the sake of it seems to be more of an eyewash, that we are so much involved in technology, but is it really adding value? That's the key question. On the point on disinfection and sanitation, though, I want to make one point. See, we should be very careful. This activity where we are spraying things and people are walking through disinfectant sprays, these things don't work. They are scientifically not proven. They actually give a false sense of security. So my kind of recommendation is, please let us follow science and what are the guidelines that are laid down by the scientific community, rather than getting over enthusiastic with spraying things here and there. These things don't work against corona, at least.
Yeah, well made point. So coming to Harish, I think this question is right up your alley. For certain procedures like ophthalmology, would any of you consider moving towards ambulatory care delivery if patients are not comfortable coming to hospitals?
Yeah, so we did a pilot project, and the feedback which we got from our patients is they are not comfortable allowing anyone in their home environment. So it miserably failed, even we wanted to deliver that. So it'll take some time. Fear is there. So I don't think the patients are ready for this, even if after providing the services.
Great point. Great point, Harish. And finally, coming to Vrinda. Vrinda, what are your last couple of nuggets for us?
I'll share a few perspectives. Probably the negative view is, and all of us here on the panel in the audience would be aware that, the cases are probably on a rise again. It is now moving beyond cities and in tier 2 cities, and lower town classes as well. That's a cause for worry, and therefore data is indicating, research studies are indicating that the incidence level is increasing. So we need to continue to remain cautious as well. The positive side to it is results, research and data, all three are indicating, whether it is in terms of medicines being used, whether it is in terms of patients walking back into hospitals. July and August being monsoon months have also indicated a higher degree of comfort in patients walking back into hospitals. We are hoping that this trend will continue and only improve over a period of time. And the sector, healthcare as a sector overall should see a recovery by the end of the year. That's probably the positive that I would want to end with. It's a clear sign of recovery. And I think if we are all cautious as individuals, as doctors, as well as hospital, as well, we should be able to recover some of the lost time that we've had in the beginning of the year.
Excellent point. And I was just thinking, I hope you will speak a little about telemedicine also. But since you have not, I will take this opportunity to close 4 research points we are exploring, and there is growing evidence in our humble research that first, economic equity is important in telemedicine. Socio-cultural equity is important. The Joint Commission has which is the largest accrediting body in US, has said that portals should use language and signages of 5th grade reading levels only. we are also getting this information that people need very easy, non-cumbersome sign-up requirements, no clunky user interfaces, no downloading of too many apps, etc. This is one area where we might have to dwell longer on another occasion. And both Pankaj and Harish have pointed out to IoT as well as blockchain and AI. These are also elements which will finally tie up together to decide what kind of a landscape our future healthcare will have, and how will we get that patient back into the hospital, or at least back to full healthcare access, whether at home, in micro hospitals, or in the hospitals. On that note, let me thank you all very much. It was a very engaging session, and a large number of people who joined us stayed back, though we have crossed the time limit. It speaks for the quality of the panel. Thank you very much. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thank you very much, sirs and ma'am. Our leaders and I have taken home so many nuggets from today's conversation, and very well moderated, Mr. Chaudhary. I'm still receiving positive messages from our leaders over email and on my WhatsApp as well. And thank you to our attendees for staying in such large numbers till the end and for sharing excellent questions. Well, a lot of the questions have been covered wonderfully and has given us a well-rounded idea of the landscape. We've also received specific questions which may require a longer and one-to-one discussion between the leaders in the audience and our experts. So we would be happy to fix meetings between you and our pool of healthcare experts for mutual benefit. Whether you would like to engage with us on our expert panel or as learners, our leaders are invited to connect with us for membership and join the healthcare circle that we're building. All the details of CXO engagements are also available on the bluecircle.co. We're very soon launching our digital professional networking platform curated specifically for business leaders, and we will be sending out invitations to select 1,000 members first across our 4 sectors of healthcare, e-mobility, energy, and real estate. So thank you again, once again, and we look forward to having you all join us soon.
Thank you, Siddharth.